Good afternoon, Year 6. We are going to attempt to read a couple of chapters of our story, Skysong. Okay, so chapter 22, Flint. An eerie silence followed, and for a while, all Flint, Esker and Blue could do was stare at the river below them. Then the diamond dust slipped away through the trees, and Flint put an arm around Blue's shoulders. That was close, he panted. I think mentioning needlespin before we set off from the giant's beard would have been helpful, Esker replied. Flint glanced at Blue. I didn't want to scare her. Blue looked down through the branches and wailed. Esker rolled her eyes, because finding out this way was so much better. Flint turned to Blue and hauled her up to a steadier branch. Then he looked at Esker. You and Balapan saved us back there. We'd never have survived all that without you. Esker grinned, then she looked around. Maybe don't tell Tomkin we got Blue jammed into the top of a very high tree, okay? Blue pulled at a branch. We tell Ma. Flint laughed. Let's kick these skis off and climb down. Balapan was waiting on a rock at the foot of the trees, and as they clambered through the lower branches, Flint watched as she swooped to Esker's shoulder and leant against the girl's back. Esker stretched up a hand and ran it over the eagle's wing, and Blue shuffled through the snow towards the eagle. Want to hug Bella? It was the name Blue had started using for the eagle, and neither Esker nor Flint had corrected her. I'm not sure the eagles are very good at hugging, Esker said. Animals are a bit different than us humans. Blue tilted her head. Animals hug, just not with arms. And, as she raised her little hand towards Balapan, the eagle loosened her wing and brushed it against Blue's palm. There, hug, see? Flint ruffled her hair. I'm proud of you, Blue. You were brave just now, really brave. They shared out some mountain cranberries and water, then they strapped on their skis and looked down at the river winding through the nether cliffs. A cluster of tundra swans were feeding on algae where the afternoon sun had thawed the ice. But other than the landscape that was absolutely still, and just as Flint was about to suggest they kept going, Esker gasped. The river, she said quietly. Before the mountains close in on it, there are lots of little tributes branching off from it. And well, if you squint really hard, the river almost looks like a giant feather. Flint peered at the scene below and his eyes widened. You're right. The feather tribe must be close, Blue said. Flint thought about it. I once heard that the Tusk tribe used to stand on the cliff tops of the north of the kingdom, then look down on the icebergs and read messages in shapes. Maybe the feather tribe used landmarks as signs too. Blue's right. I think they are close. The three of them skied quickly down the mountain, and rather than chasing the frozen river, the escape with the Thunder Ghost was still fresh in their minds, and Needlespin's remains lay scattered across it. They hastened along beside it, following its curve and jumping over the ravines, which snaked out into the mountains. They glanced around, eagerly searching for any sign of civilization, while Balapan flew ahead. And when Pebble realised that Needlespin was no longer a threat, he leapt down from Flint's hood and joined in the hunt. The fox pup bounded ahead, sniffing at the snow and paddling carefully across the tundras. But when the mountains closed in again and just the main river ran through a narrow gully, Pebble started to bark. Shh, Pebble, Flint hissed. We can't afford to draw attention to ourselves. But still the fox pup barked, and Flint noticed that he was pawing at the snow on the mountainside to their right. Esker frowned. What is it? She whispered. What has he found? I think he's caught scent and wants us to follow it. Flint hurried closer to Pebble and noticed a shelf of rock hanging above the path. A few metres from the fox pup, in a swish of feathers, Balapan landed on it. Then she stayed very still. Something about this mountain is important, Esker said slowly. Both Pebble and Balapan know it. She took a step beneath the ledge and her eyes widened. Look at this. Strung from the tip of the ledge right down to the base of the mountain was a giant spiderweb laced in ice. It hung in delicate spirals, each loop coated in dashes of frost as thin as silver eyelashes. And Flint knew, as he gazed upon it, that the magic was involved. Then he saw how the centre of the web was a cluster of ice, and on it sat a spider. It was the size of a fist and as clear as ice. An ice spider, Flint murmured. They usually spin ice unless it's a clear night. Then they spin moonlight. He paused. It's beautiful. How is it going to help us? They watched quietly as the spider left the middle of its web. Then Flint understood. The web was not complete. The spider was spinning still, and the more it spun, we found that it did not fill the spaces left with ordinary hoops. Words were appearing, silver words that shone in the twilight. It's trying to tell us something, Esker breathed. No one dared speak until the spider had stopped and two words glistened in the web. Chin down. Flint turned to Esker. Chin down? I don't understand, he threw up his hands up. We've only got 3 days to stop the ice cream, and we're faced with an ice spider spinning nonsense. We need to find the feather tribe. Chin up, Esker said. I heard you say that to Blue when you were trying to encourage her to keep going through the Nevercliffs this morning. Flint turned away from the web and looked on down through the path towards the mountains. Yeah, well, this spider got it wrong then, because the saying is chin down, which makes no sense at all. He grabbed Blue by the hand, but to his surprise, he found her reluctant to move on. Come on, Blue, no time for this. But his sister didn't move. She kept her head down and her eyes fixed on the base of the mountain. Chin down. Put chin down, Flint, look. Flint tucked his chin into his chest and followed Blue's gaze. Then he saw what he was looking at, something they would have missed completely had Blue not listened to the spider's instructions. There, nestled into the base of the mountain, was a very faint, dome-shaped crack in the snow, as if perhaps someone had opened a way into the rock not so long ago. Flint and Esker brushed the snow away until they found that they had been looking for a door carved into the cliff face with a small skull acting as a candle. A bird skull, Flint breathed. A snowy owl, it looks like. And then his face broke into a grin. The snowy owl is the symbol of the feather tribe. I think we've found the way into the lost chambers. They turned to see the spider drop to the ground, then it scuttered down the path onto the mountains. But as it went, they noticed it didn't leave a trail of thread or tiny pricks where its feet marked the snow. It left footprints, human footprints, and Flint looked at them and he remembered Whitefur's words. Good luck in your search for the lost chambers, and remember, you have the wild on your side, and the wild doesn't play by ordinary rules. That was a wanderer, wasn't it? He whispered to Esker. Like how Whitefur was an Urkin bear, but also a man. That spider, it was, I don't know what it was, but it was one of your kind. I'm sure of it. Esker's eyes were wide. Do you think one day I'll learn how to shapeshift into a wild creature? Flint smiled. Wouldn't put it past you. He looked at his little sister. You were right to trust that spider, Blue, to wait until you understood what it was saying. Blue nodded. I'm clever. And though Flint was used to waiting for Blue, used to her trawling behind and not understanding, this time she took his hand and shivered, led him into the mountain. Esker followed with Balapan on his shoulder. They were in a passageway long enough to stand in, and balanced on the rocky ledges either side of them had halved eggshells of every colour imaginable. Speckled green, turquoise, malted purple, gold, and inside each was a candle that flickered. Flint pulled the door shut behind them. Then his eyes travelled over the eggshells as they walked in. Lesser snow goose, red-winged sparrow, mountain bluebirds. This is the feather tribe, all right. Only they would know where to find the eggs of these birds. Then he gulped as he remembered the reception his tribe had given Esker. He slid a glance at his friend, who was looking equally nervous. Just leave the conversations to me, he said. Esker nodded, and she laid her hand on Balapan's talons, and Flint thought it looked like the girl and the bird were walking hand in hand. Pebble hurried ahead, but after a few minutes he stopped and cocked his head to one side, because blocking the way ahead was a large bird with a long scooped neck and a fan of white feathers that filled the entire tunnel. It looked like a peacock, and yet its colouring was different. This bird was as white as freshly fallen snow. Flint blinked in disbelief. That's a moon, Flint. Esker gulped. Is that a good or a bad thing? I didn't come across them in my training with Balapan. Flint rubbed his eyes. Neither. It's just unlikely. Impossible even. These birds have been extinct for centuries. Esker peered closer. Look at its feathers. Each one has a certain pattern on it. Flint nodded. Eyes, our ancestors used to say, because moonlets can see beyond ordinary things, into hearts and minds, and Blue squealed as the white markings flickered in a fraction to reveal hundreds of grey staring eyes. I don't know how the feather tribe got hold of this creature, but I think it's acting as a guard, Flint whispered. I think if the moon lets us past, it means it trusts us. Very slowly the feathered eyes opened and closed, and then the bird lowered its tail feathers into a sweep of white and blocked out the shadows so that the group could see what lay beyond. Darkness. A space so black there was no difference between blinking and keeping your eyes open. Flint lifted Pebble into his hood, then holding Blue's hand still, he shuffled forward. Esker tiptoed after them. Is it a dead end? Blue moaned. I want home, Flint. Tired and cold. Flint squinted into the black, but just as he was about to speak, there was a creak and then a click behind them, and he knew immediately what had happened. A door in the dark had been closed. They had walked straight into a trap. Chapter 23, Esker. Esker felt Balapan leap from her shoulder, but as she reached out with scrambling hands that met with wooden bars ahead, around and behind, Esker gulped. They were locked inside a cage. She swung her skis down to grab the bow and heard Flint unsheath his anything knife. Then a voice in the dark spoke. Who are you? It was a boy who sounded only a little older than Esker and Flint. Two of us, a fur tribe, Flint stammered, and then he paused and added hopefully, Fur tribe warriors and need fire, Flint whimpered. Cold toes. Another voice slithered out of nowhere, a girl this time, and her tone was frostier than the boys. They don't sound like warriors to me. I vote we let our arrows fly. I'm a wanderer, Esker said. Wolf-Tooth's daughter. He came to you before the battle at Winterfang. Her words were met with a deathly hush. Then the girl's voice came again, and each word was coated in hate. You're not welcome here. Your father is the reason ours is gone. If he hadn't come and stirred up ideas of fighting the Ice Queen, maybe ours wouldn't have left the Never Cliffs. She paused. You're the reason we lost our tribe. The boy spoke again. Easy, Rook. Remember the Moonflint. It'll let them pass. But there was murmuring now. Dozens of voices clamouring in the dark. Get her out. She's no right to be here. Esker's ears churned with all the all too familiar sounds of a tribe turned against her, and she felt the hopes that she'd harboured on her journey through the Nevercliffs shift slowly away. And then Rook's voice came, cool but loaded. We should kill her. Esker's pulse skidded, and the voices grew into a knot of angry hisses. How dare she show her face? Our parents are gone because of her. She's probably working for the Ice Queen. Esker shrank inside her furs, and from Flint's feet, Pebble whimpered. Was it to be like this everywhere she went? Walls of loathing that she couldn't break down. The voices rose louder still, the threats grew darker, and Balapan leapt back onto her shoulder. Esker felt the eagle's talons dig down into her bones. Then Balapan cried out, a sharp screech that echoed through the mountain. The voices fell silent. Lights, the boys in the darkness commanded. Bring up the lights! A scraping sound followed, of metal striking stone. Then one by one lamps emerged on the rocky ledges, until finally a giant atrium came into view. Enormous dream catchers studded with quartz and strung with snowy owl feathers dangled from the roof, while the cavern floor was scattered with loose feathers, red ones stripped of black, white ones dashed with grey, large black ones, oval downy ones, and small electric blues. And there were branches too, fashioned into chairs and tables in amongst the feathers. It was like a giant nest. But even more extraordinary were the feather tribe themselves. The cavern walls were full of scoops and bulges, and inside every one was a large wooden bird cage, like the one Esker and her friends were trapped in, but the doors to those cages were open. Crouched within were boys and girls, all with black hair and dark skin, and clad in wolf furs with wonderful feathers sprayed out in a fan over their shoulders and chests. They were armed, each with an arrow poised on a bow, and every single one was pointing at Esker and her friends. You have a golden eagle. It was the boy they'd heard speak first, and he was standing in the biggest of the bird cages. He was tucked into the middle of the far wall. He climbed down the ledges, his electric blue shoulder feathers glittering in the candlelight. Before striding across the cavern floor, he stood before his prisoners, and his face was softer than Esker expected it to be. We only want to ask about the frost horn, she said quietly. Flint nodded. We don't mean any trouble. I had a dream that you would come, the boy said. A girl with a golden eagle asking about the songs we sing of the long-forgotten frost horn. Esker lowered her bow, and with Balapan still perched on her shoulder, she gripped the bars of the cage. Yes, she breathed. Your song. That's why we've come. She glanced down at Blue, and to find proper shelter for our friend. She fell in the lake, and the thunder ghost nearly drowned her. There was a snort from behind the boy, as a girl with narrow eyes and a fan of black feathers over her upper body slunk forward. Lies, Jay. Don't listen to her. No one could outwit the thunder ghost now that the Ice Queen is them under her power. And there's something strange about her voice. I don't like it. Esker recognised the girl as the one who had spoken with such malice a moment ago, and she knew she had a choice. Back down, as she had done in the labyrinth, or stand up and try to be brave. It's not lies, she said shakily. Flint rescued Blue from the lake with one of his inventions. The boy, Jay, frowned. Inventions? Flint blushed and murmured something into his chest, but Esker pressed on. Yes, when he said he was a warrior earlier, he meant to say he was an inventor. Her voice was rough and gravelly thanks to the Ice Queen's magic, but she gathered up her words nevertheless. One of the best that Urkemold has ever seen. Flint slid a glance at Esker. You really are terrible at conversations. But Jay didn't wrinkle his nose or scoff at Esker's words. He just nodded. Then he looked at the girl beside him. There is something different about her voice, but I'm not quite sure it's something we should fear. And we could do with an inventor at a time as dark as these. What do you think, Rook? Rook circled the cage, her dark eyes never leaving Esker's, and then she shrugged. Suit yourself. But you know what I think of your visions. Just because you dreamed of Moonflint protecting us, and one turns up to show us the entrance of the lost chambers, doesn't mean that we should let the inventor, a wanderer, and, she looked down her nose at Blue, a snivelling little nobody into our tribe, especially when they go banging on about the frost horn, which we all know doesn't exist. Flint raised his chin at Rook. His eyes hard, and Esker could feel the anger on Blue's behalf boiling inside him. She reached a hand out and held his arm. Not now, Flint. We need their help. Rook's words dripped on. They'll weaken the feather tribe, Jay. Mark my words. She sloped off into the shadows, and Jay turned back to her prisoner. The Moonflint trusted you earlier, and that's enough for me. Whatever Rook says. But Before I tell you anything about us, I need to know how you found the lost chambers when even the Ice Queen and her guards failed to." He paused. "Prove that you're against the Ice Queen and her dark magic." And so Flint and Esker told Jay of their escape from Winterfang, of the sleigh chase through the deep roots, and Whitefur's words about the Skysong and the Frosthorn, and finally about the Ice Spider who had helped them find the lost chambers. Jay nodded when Esker and Flint finished speaking. "You're a true wanderer, Esker. Your bond with the Golden Eagle proves it, and I can sense the power in your voice, despite what the Ice Queen is doing to it." Balapan's talons squeezed Esker's shoulder gently, and she felt a quiet sense of pride. "My parents are the chief and the chiefess of the Feather Tribe, and though they're locked up in Winterfang, they told me to listen to my dreams. The gift every chief of their Feather Tribe is blessed with, and I'm listening to them now." He lowered his voice and looked straight at Esker. "I want to help you." And those last 5 words cradled Esker in a warmth, because there was an opening now, a little space in that tribe for Esker and her friends. Jay took a key from his pocket and turned it in the birdcage lock. The door creaked open, and Esker, Flint, Pebble and Blue and Balapan stepped out into the atrium. But from the shadows of the alcove, Rook narrowed her eyes and turned a sharp white fang over in her hands. It was the one she had stepped onto a few weeks ago while out in the open, the one that had caused her foot to turn black before she pulled it out, and the one that belonged, undoubtedly, to a cursed Wolverine. And only one person had the power to hex a Wolverine. So who does the tooth belong to? It was from a Wolverine who was under whose power? And it stabbed her in the foot, and it turned her foot black. So think about what that might mean. Yeah, so if that Wolverine was hexed,
that means it might be tracking her.
yes, it's getting exciting now, isn't it? Okay, so we are on chapter 24. Thank you for listening. I hope you are enjoying our story. Like, subscribe, do all the things that you need to do, and hopefully we'll see you all soon. Stay safe. Bye.